Most brides walk down the aisle feeling cherished, believing that the person waiting for them at the altar was their soulmate, the one who will cherish them until their dying breath. Maris walked down the aisle knowing with absolute certainty that her husband did not love her, would never love her, and that hoping otherwise was the cruelest lie she could tell herself. It began with the veil. When the Alpha King approached, when he finally lifted that gold-embroidered thread and looked at his future wife for the first time, well, Maris hadn't known a look could crush all hopes of love until that very moment. She met his gaze hoping, if not for affection, she'd never met the man before, then at least for a hint of kindness. "I've just turned 18, she thought to convey with her eyes. "I've never been a wife before, but you've been a husband 3 times over. Help me. Guide me. Tell me how to make this union work for the sake of our kingdoms." Instead, she found only contempt, which did not improve as his eyes traveled down her body. His expression shifted, downright fell, his lips curling slightly into a grimace that made her stomach twist with embarrassment. "Well," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "at least those hips will bear me children." Laughter rippled through the nobility, some polite and uncomfortable, others openly cruel. Maris felt heat flood her face as whispers followed, the kind of whispers that had shadowed her all her life. She'd always been curvier than her sisters, softer where they were angular, fuller where they were slight. Her mother had called her voluptuous, had assured her it was a blessing, that men wanted women with substance, with curves to hold on to. But the king didn't look like he'd been blessed. He looked like he'd drawn the short straw. And while she'd never been ashamed of her body before this moment, suddenly, every reassurance she'd ever received felt like a lie designed to make her feel better about being too much, too soft, too round in all the wrong places. The mating ceremony was brief and cold. The king's hand on hers was duty, nothing more. And when the priest declared them bound for life, forever, no escape, no reprieve, her new husband didn't kiss her. "I will never love you, nor will I desire you," he whispered in her ear. "But give me a boy, please me, and you shall have nothing to fear from me, wife." He didn't wait for her to reply. He simply turned around, already moving on to more important matters. Then came the parade through the city, a tradition during which the new queen was presented to her people, walking beside her king through streets lined with cheering citizens throwing flowers. Except the king didn't walk beside her. He walked in front, 3 paces ahead, his shoulders broad and dismissive, never once glancing back to see if she followed. The message was clear to everyone watching. This was his wife's place, behind him, below him, never at his side. The crowd cheered, indifferent to the cruelty playing out before them. They saw a beautiful wedding, a powerful alliance, a kingdom secured for another generation, and a king treating his new wife as he did all the others before her, like she was just a means to an end. What Maris didn't know was that sometimes it takes a failed marriage to understand what real love is, that sometimes the worst day of your life plants the seeds for your best one. The parade route wound through the marketplace, and a flash of movement caught Maris's eye. A small figure darting between stalls, a boy, no more than 8 or 9, barefoot and filthy. He was clutching something to his thin chest, and when their eyes caught for just a moment as he ran past the royal procession, he winked at her. Actually winked. This grimy, reckless child with trouble dancing in his dark eyes. Maris felt her lips twitch with the ghost of a real smile. Then came the shouting. "Thief! Someone grabbed the little bastard!" The crowd parted like water, and Maris's heart sank as she saw guards dragging the boy back into the street. He was struggling, kicking with all the strength in his small body, still clutching. She could see now, a flat piece of bread. Just bread. Nothing more. The merchant was already there, his face red with fury. He grabbed the boy's thin wrist and yanked it forward, pulling a knife from his belt. "Thief!" he spat. "The law gives me the right. Stealing from my stall means losing the hand that took." Maris's stomach dropped as understanding crashed over her. He was going to do it right here, right now, in the middle of the parade route. He was going to maim a child for stealing bread while the whole kingdom watched. Wait! The word tore from her mouth before she could think, before she could remember her place 3 paces behind and silent. The merchant froze, the knife hovering over the boy's wrist. The crowd went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. The boy was hungry, Maris said, her voice steadier than she felt as she stepped forward, moving past where her husband stood watching with cold, assessing eyes. Her hands went to her ears, removing one of the heavy gold earrings she'd been given that morning as part of her bridal jewelry. Here, for the bread he took. She held it out to the merchant, then removed the other earring and crouched down to press it into the boy's dirty palm, closing his fingers around it. And this, for more food, later, when you need it. The merchant stared at the earring in his hand, his eyes widening at its value, worth more than his entire stall, probably. The knife lowered slowly. The boy stared up at Maris like she'd just performed a miracle, like she was something holy and impossible descended into his nightmare of a life. Go, she told him quietly, gently, the way she might speak to a frightened animal. Quickly. But he didn't go. Instead, he scrambled to his feet with the earring clutched tight in his fist and said, loud enough for everyone in the marketplace to hear, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry you." Laughter rippled through the crowd at the ridiculous declaration from this dirty child to the queen in her wedding robes. Maris felt something crack wide open in her chest. She reached out and touched his bruised face with gentle fingers, let herself smile for real this time, let herself have this one moment of pure, uncomplicated goodness. "Then I'll be waiting," she whispered. Afterwards, she followed her husband with her head high and her heart breaking, holding on to one thought, fierce and bright. I am queen now. He can despise me, but I have power. I can help people. I can make a difference in this cruel kingdom. That small rebellion, that stubborn refusal to harden into what he wanted, would cost her dearly over the years to come. It would earn her his mockery, his contempt, his casual cruelty delivered in private and public alike. But 16 years later, that same softness would also save her. It would bring her real love, real happiness. Everything she'd stopped believing she deserved, all because of a promise made by a boy with dark eyes and an impossible dream. Chapter 1. After 16 years in the palace, Queen Maris had grown accustomed to being ignored. The contempt didn't humiliate her anymore. She'd learned to hold her head high despite the whispers behind jeweled fans or the courtiers who turned away when she approached. But God, it got lonely. Especially in the middle of a wedding celebration, surrounded by hundreds of people dancing and laughing and celebrating love. The banquet hall glittered with oil lamps, their flames reflecting off gilt-edged pillars and intricate mosaic tiles. Musicians played from a raised platform, dancers twirled across the marble floor in jewel-toned silks, and Maris sat alone at a table near the dais, a position of honor that felt more like exile. It had been a year since King Jaromir died in battle. A year since the man who'd spent 16 years belittling her, parading his mistresses through the palace, making cruel jokes about her body in front of the entire court, encouraging them to call her the Big Queen, like it was an official title, had finally left her life for good. And still, the court expected her to mourn. "Do we really have to pretend we miss the bastard?" Rhaenyra had asked last month, her 15-year-old daughter's voice sharp with anger she'd inherited from watching her mother endure. "Yes," Maris had said, "pretend always for the eyes of the court. It's the only way to survive here." Even now, as Queen Regent ruling until her son Theon came of age, she had to be careful. Had to sit quietly, smile politely, and not draw attention. Had to remember that power was an illusion and the court was waiting for any excuse to tear her down. Jaromir had improved slightly after the twins were born, 2 boys to secure his line. He'd stopped coming to her bed after that, but he'd never been warm. A man who built himself up by tearing others down was incapable of warmth. And now he was gone, and Maris still didn't know what her life was supposed to feel like without him. It was like she'd forgotten, in mind and body, what contentment was. The music shifted, and around the hall, couples rose to dance. The bride and groom led the way, their faces glowing with happiness while panic began to flutter in Maris's stomach. If she remained sitting while everyone else danced, it would be offensive, like she didn't support the marriage. But she couldn't very well stand up and dance alone. That wasn't proper. And no one was coming to ask her. Movement caught her eye, a young lord approaching her table with purpose. Hope flared stupidly in her chest. Not until he walked right past her to the woman seated 2 tables away, bowing with a flourish. Laughter erupted from a group of courtiers nearby, and Maris caught the words, the look on her face, actually thought, before they dissolved into more cruel laughter. Heat flooded her cheeks. She looked down at her hands, trying to decide if she could slip out without causing more of a scene. Your Majesty. She looked up to find a man standing before her, his hand extended, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. He was young, mid-20s at most, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes a deep brown so intense they seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. Sir? She asked, confused as to why he'd approach her. He carried himself with an air of authority mixed with the impetuousness of youth, the kind of man who didn't see why he shouldn't get his way. And he was beautiful, not just physically, but with such an aura of charm in his smile that she couldn't imagine how he wouldn't get his way. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that somehow made him more striking. Act like you're with me, he said quietly, and when he smiled at her, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. Maris stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Was this another joke? His scent held the unmistakable power of an alpha wolf, strength, dominance, command, surely a joke. She looked around quickly, searching the group of young nobles who must have dared him to approach the big queen for their amusement. Forgive me, Your Majesty, for my callousness. The man bowed formally, his expression shifting to something more respectful, though that intensity never left his eyes. But it really would be an honor if you'd allow me this dance. He extended his hand again, waiting. The music swelled. Around them, the floor filled with dancing couples. If she refused now, if she stayed seated, she'd insult tradition. Better to be mocked for dancing than to fail in her duty. Maris took his hand. His palm was warm, calloused, a working man's hand, not the soft grip of nobility. He led her onto the floor with easy confidence, and when they began to move, she realized with a jolt that he was holding her closer than strictly necessary. His hand at her waist was warm through the silk of her gown, his thumb brushing against her ribs, and then, to her absolute astonishment, she felt him lean in and inhale deeply at her neck. Maris jerked back slightly. What are you doing? She asked, eyes widening. His eyes had gone gold, his wolf rising to the surface, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. Forgive me, my queen. I couldn't help myself. He said it so ardently and with such sincerity that for one impossible moment, she believed him. Something inside her responded, something she'd thought Jaromir had killed years ago, a flutter of heat so sharp it made her knees weak. Then reality crashed back in. Of course, he was mocking her, making a game of it like her husband used to. Do I smell so awful? She sighed, hating how defeated she sounded. His hand tightened at her waist. You smell like a dream, he said, his voice low and fervent. One that's been haunting me for too long. Maris forgot how to breathe. All she could do was stare into those impossible eyes and feel her carefully controlled world tilt sideways. She wanted to berate him for mocking her, wanted to pull away, to protect herself before this stranger could land another blow. But instead, she heard herself whisper in a hopeful tone, What do you mean? He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. Meet me in the gardens in 20 minutes. She gasped. The suggestion was beyond improper for anyone, but for a queen, it was scandalous. She couldn't believe he would dare. I can't, she began. Please. His voice was urgent now, almost desperate. "We must talk, in private." His lips grazed her ear, and Maris stopped remembering all the reasons this was dangerous. The music ended. He stepped back, bowed formally, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. Maris stood frozen on the dance floor, her heart hammering, her wolf pacing restlessly inside her. What had just happened, she thought. This can't be real. Chapter 2. Maris watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart still hammering from the feel of his breath against her ear. 20 minutes. He wanted to meet her in the gardens in 20 minutes. She walked back to her table on shaky legs, sinking into her chair like her bones had turned to water. "You smell like a dream," he'd said. The words echoed in her mind, and she pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. It couldn't mean what it sounded like. It couldn't. Men didn't look at her like that, with hunger, with want, especially not men who looked like that, young and beautiful with devastating smiles. So why had he asked her to dance? "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You know better than this." She'd learned better 16 years ago, when Jaromir had lifted her veil and looked at her with disgust. When he'd taken her to bed and made her feel like a chore to be endured. But for a moment on that dance floor, she'd forgotten. Foolish, she told herself, so foolish. Laughter erupted from a nearby table, a group of young nobles, their voices carrying over the music with the careless volume of people who'd had too much wine. A male voice rose above the others. "Who was it who bet that man to dance with the queen earlier?" Maris's head snapped up, her blood turning to ice. Another voice answered, female this time, giggling. "Don't know, but someone owes him a whole lot of money for his efforts." More laughter followed, cruel, delighted laughter that she recognized all too well. The warmth in her chest turned to stone. Of course. Of course it had been a bet. Of course those beautiful words, that intense gaze, that moment of connection she'd felt. Of course it had all been entertainment for the nobles. She shouldn't be surprised. This was how they'd treated her for 16 years, but somehow this time it made her angry. Not hurt, not humiliated, angry. What had she ever done to deserve this? She'd been a good queen. She'd been kind to the servants, generous to the poor, dutiful in every godforsaken way they demanded. She'd endured Jaromir's cruelty in silence. She'd raised their children with love despite their father's coldness. She'd never once used her power to strike back at the courtiers who mocked her. And still they couldn't leave her alone. Would they treat her children this way? Ramira was to make her courtly debut in a few months. Would these same nobles make bets about her daughter? Would they mock Theon when he took the throne, harm him or his brother to ensure they never did? The thought made her hands curl into fists beneath the table. I won't allow it, she thought. I can't fall for their games. I have to be smarter, for my children's sake. Maris rose abruptly, her chair scraping against marble, catching a passing servant by the sleeve. The man I danced with, Maris said, keeping her voice steady. The young one with dark hair, who is he? The servant blinked, clearly surprised by the question. That would be Captain Callan, Your Majesty, she said. A soldier in your late husband's army, distinguished in battle, I'm told. He was invited tonight as thanks for his service. Maris released the servant with a nod, her chest tight. So, a poor soldier offered money to dance with the queen. And his station? She hated asking, hated that it mattered, but she needed to know. The servant glanced around nervously before answering. No land or title to his name, Your Majesty. Just a soldier. She hesitated, then added quietly. A poor one, I'd imagine. The king wasn't known for his generosity to the lower ranks. Merrick nodded again. It made perfect sense. Of course he'd taken the bet. How could she blame him? If he had no land, no title, no wealth, then the money they'd offered must have seemed like a fortune. But did he have to make it feel so real? Did he have to look at her like that? Touch her like that? Speak those words that had made her stupid, traitorous heart believe? You were a fool, she told herself viciously, a desperate, lonely fool. She needed to leave before she did something foolish, like march over to those laughing nobles and demand to know which one of them had paid a soldier to humiliate their queen. She crossed the banquet hall with her head high, ignoring the stares that followed her. In the corridor outside, opened onto the gardens through a series of arched doorways, she could see the fountain beyond, lit by torches, the water catching the firelight like scattered jewels. The gardens where he'd asked her to meet him. Her throat tightened. She was such an idiot. "Wait," a voice called out behind her. "Don't go." Maris spun around. He was there, Captain Kalon, emerging from one of the garden doorways like he'd been waiting for her. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and in the torchlight, that scar above his eyebrow seemed more pronounced. "You again?" she said, and was furious to hear her voice shake. He reached for her hand. She snatched it back like he'd burned her. "Your Majesty?" He stopped, his eyes searching her face with what looked like genuine concern. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" He looked worried. Actually worried, like he cared, and God help her, it made everything worse. Maris raised her chin. "I'm fine, thank you." She moved to walk past him, but he stepped into her path. "You don't look it," he said softly. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. "It's fine, really." She met his gaze directly. "Good night, Captain." "Good night." He looked genuinely confused, almost hurt. "Already? But we were supposed to—" "Enough." The word came out sharper than she intended. She forced herself to look at him steadily. "How much money did they offer you?" He blinked. "What?" He looked bewildered, his brow furrowing. "Your Majesty, I don't know what you're—" "Oh, stop." She was so tired of the games, the lies, the pretending. "I know you're a soldier. I know you have no title or land to your name, and I don't blame you. Truly, I don't." She watched him pale, watched something that looked almost like embarrassment cross his handsome face. "But didn't you care at all how it would embarrass me?" she asked, the words coming out more hurt than angry. "Embarrass you?" The captain looked stricken now. "I would never—" "You asked me to dance under those circumstances," she interrupted. "Surely you knew it would embarrass me." She meant under the circumstances of the bet, of being paid to touch her, to speak sweet lies, to make her believe for one impossible moment that someone might actually want her. But he seemed to take it differently. He took a step back, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I apologize, my queen." His voice had gone formal, distant. "I didn't mean to embarrass you. I should have known better." He looked genuinely hurt, and despite everything, despite the bet, despite knowing this was all a lie, Maris felt her anger drain away. It wasn't his fault, not really. He was just a poor soldier trying to survive. Those nobles who'd made the bet, who'd laughed at her humiliation, they were the ones who should be ashamed. This man didn't belong at court. He was too sincere, too open. He'd be eaten alive here. "It's all right," she heard herself say, her voice gentler now. "You meant no harm. Good night, sir." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "In other circumstances, would you have been happy to dance with me?" Maris froze, turned back slowly. "What?" she breathed. He stepped closer, and there was something raw in his expression. "I'm asking if our circumstances had been different, if I wasn't just a soldier, if there hadn't been whatever bet you think existed. Would you have joined me in the garden as I asked?" He murmured. She wanted to lie, wanted to laugh it off, to protect herself with mockery and ice. but she felt the blush heating her cheeks and knew he could see it too. She started, then stopped, floundering. That's not... You would have, he said softly, wonder and something like triumph in his voice. You wanted to. You're trying to embarrass me again? She accused, but her voice wavered. No, he said, taking another step closer. I'm trying to understand. She couldn't do this. Couldn't stand here and let him see how desperately she'd wanted to believe. Maris turned and ran, actually ran, like a girl instead of a queen. Behind her, she heard him call out, "Your Majesty, wait!" She didn't stop. Chapter 3. 2 days later, Maris was having breakfast with her children when Rhaenyra announced she would not be getting married. I'm not about to be tied to some man I've never met, Mother, her daughter declared, her dark eyes flashing with the same stubborn fire Maris remembered having at 15. It's out of the question. Maris took a sip of her tea, trying to maintain her composure while one of the twins was attempting to balance a piece of flatbread on his nose. Of course not, darling, Maris said calmly. But when the future king of a powerful kingdom travels all the way here to discuss a potential marriage and alliance, it is my duty to listen to what he has to say. I can't very well send him home without seeing him. The council has all but decided already, Rhaenyra said, crossing her arms. They want me married off to secure their precious alliance. Theon's bread fell off his nose and landed in Orion's cup of juice, splashing both twins. Boys, Maris said without looking at them, please. Sorry, Mother, they chorused, though neither sounded particularly sorry. Maris turned back to Rhaenyra, reaching across the table to touch her daughter's hand. Well, my darling, I heard from the servants that he is very handsome. I don't care, Rhaenyra said fiercely. I will not become a man's property like you were father's. Maris felt her smile falter. Of course her daughter had a bad opinion of marriage. How could she not, after watching what Jaromir had done to her mother for 16 years? Don't deny it, Rhaenyra continued, her voice breaking slightly. I heard they still mock you at royal functions, that you were humiliated again at that wedding 2 days ago. Maris shrugged. She was humiliated at court every day. It didn't stick with her anymore, and it wasn't like anything out of the ordinary had happened at that wedding. Mother, can we borrow the ceremonial dagger? Theon asked suddenly, his young face the picture of innocence. Absolutely not, Maris said, recognizing that particular expression. But we'll be very, very good with it, Orion added, nodding earnestly. My love, Maris said, ignoring the twins and focusing on Rhaenyra. Trust me. I know kindness when I see it, and I will not let you become the wife of a man who doesn't possess it. I promise you that. But what if the council... The council advises, Maris said firmly. I decide. Your happiness matters more to me than any alliance. Rhaenyra was watching her mother with something like hope in her eyes. Now, Maris stood, smoothing her robes. I need to go meet this prince and determine if he's worthy of you, which frankly I doubt anyone is. What if we swear on our honor as princes? Theon asked. Do you swear it? Maris asked, turning to look at her sons with raised eyebrows. Both of you? Both twins nodded eagerly, their young faces serious. Still no, Maris said, fighting back a smile. I don't believe you after the stunt you pulled last time. She walked toward the door. It was funny, Theon called after her. You know it was funny, Mother. Maris held back her smile until she was out of sight. In the hallway, her steward, Lord Hadim, one of the rare staff members she trusted, bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, he said, the prince awaits you in the fountain garden. Tell me about him, Maris said as they walked through the palace corridors. Lord Hadim consulted the scroll in his hands. Prince Kaelin of Saravia. His kingdom controls the mountain passes to the north, valuable trade routes that would benefit our merchants considerably. The alliance would strengthen both kingdoms. Did he say explicitly that he was after Ramira's hand? Not directly, Your Majesty. He mentioned wanting to discuss an alliance. Lord Hadim hesitated. Given the princess is still young, he may not have wanted to mention the engagement too directly out of politeness. But typically, such alliances are solidified through marriage. Maris nodded. If he was kind, if he was patient, if he would wait until Ramira was older and ready, perhaps this could work. They entered the fountain garden, one of the most beautiful spaces in the palace. Water cascaded over blue and white tiles in geometric patterns. Orange trees lined the pathways, their blossoms perfuming the air. Your Majesty, Lord Hadim announced, may I present His Royal Highness, Prince Kalan of Saravia. A man stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he gazed at the fountain. He turned upon being called, and Maris forgot how to breathe. He was young, mid-20s at most, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and warm bronze skin that seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. He carried himself with an air of authority mixed with the impetuousness of youth, the kind of man who didn't see why he shouldn't get his way. And with such an aura of charm in his smile, Maris couldn't imagine how he wouldn't get his way. Your Majesty, he said, bowing formally, it is an honor to meet you. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that somehow made him more striking. When he smiled at her, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. Maris felt like she'd been struck by lightning. Something tickled at the back of her mind. Something familiar about that smile, that scar, that dimple. But no, she'd never met this prince before. She would have remembered. The honor is mine, Your Highness, she said, curtsying in return. Welcome to our kingdom. He straightened, and his smile widened as he joked, I hope I don't embarrass Her Majesty today. He said it with a wink, playful and intimate, and Maris blinked, confused. Why would he embarrass her? That was an odd thing to say to someone you'd just met. She smiled politely, unsure how to respond. Would you walk with me, Your Majesty? The prince offered her his arm. I've heard your gardens are magnificent. Maris stared, momentarily stunned. Men rarely asked her to walk beside them. Jaromir had always walked ahead, keeping her 3 paces behind like a servant. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of him through the fine silk of his sleeve. Your journey was pleasant, I hope? Maris asked. Long, he said, but worth it. I've been wanting to come here for some time. We're honored by your interest in an alliance. Maris smiled politely. But, as you know, my daughter, Princess Ramira, is young still. Tell me about you, the prince interrupted gently, turning to look at her with those intense dark eyes. Maris faltered. I was queen for 16 years during my marriage, and now I serve as queen regent until my son comes of age. That must be difficult, he said, ruling alone, managing the council, raising 3 children. I manage, she said carefully. But truly, Your Highness, you should know more about Ramira. She's bright, accomplished in music and languages, and... Is she kind? He asked, still watching Maris's face. Very kind. She has a generous heart and... Like her mother, then, he interrupted. The words made her flush. She's also quite beautiful, Maris tried again, and many say she'll make an excellent... Your Majesty, he said, his voice dropping lower. Forgive me, but I didn't come here to discuss your daughter. Maris stopped walking. I don't understand. Her heart began to pound. What about the alliance you wanted? We'd understood you'd hoped for it to be sealed through marriage. Yes, marriage, he said, turning to face her fully. They had stopped beside the central fountain, the sound of falling water creating a cocoon of privacy. Marriage between you and I. Maris blinked, thinking she'd misheard. Come again? She felt dizzy, confused. Your Highness, are you making fun of me? I would never joke about this, he said with heated sincerity. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. When it comes to you, Your Highness, I couldn't be more serious. She searched his face, looking for some clue that would explain this bizarre conversation. That scar, those eyes, that smile, they did seem familiar, but she couldn't place them. I'm sorry, she said. I don't understand. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're even more beautiful than I remembered, he murmured. Remembered? Her voice came out breathless. But she couldn't finish the sentence because he was leaning in, his eyes darkening, his lips a breath away from hers. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the fountain, and she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there feeling the heat of him, the want radiating from him in waves. This was wrong. He was supposed to be here for Ramira. This was her daughter's potential husband, and she was standing here letting him touch her face, letting him look at her like... Maris jerked away and slapped him before his lips could land, not hard, more shock than anger, but the sound cracked through the garden like a whip. Your Highness, she said, her voice shaking, you forget yourself. I am not why you're here. She gathered her skirts and fled, practically running down the garden path toward the palace, her face burning with humiliation and confusion, and something else she refused to name. Behind her, she heard him call out, Your Majesty, wait! But she didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't let herself wonder why a prince who'd supposedly come to court her daughter had just tried to kiss her instead. And definitely didn't acknowledge the traitorous part of her that had wanted, desperately, impossibly, to let him. Chapter 4. Maris woke the next morning with a pounding headache and a sense of unease she couldn't quite place. Her eyes felt swollen from crying, and she was as tired as if she'd spent the night tossing and turning, falling asleep only in the wee hours of the morning. Except she had no recollection of either crying nor of being kept awake by any type of worry. She was breaking her fast with tea and dates when one of her attendants appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, the prince is waiting to speak with you in the blue receiving room. Maris paused, her cup halfway to her lips. Prince? She asked. What prince? The attendant blinked, clearly surprised by the question. Prince Kalen, Your Majesty? He said slowly. He arrived yesterday. He wished to discuss an alliance. Right. Maris set down her cup quickly, feeling foolish. I must have... There's been so much happening, She trailed off, brushing away her confusion. She must have forgotten to be briefed properly. The council had mentioned a visiting prince, hadn't they? Tell him I'll be there shortly. The blue receiving room was one of the smaller, more intimate spaces in the palace, high ceilings with carved wooden screens that let in dappled sunlight, cushions arranged around a low table set with refreshments. When she entered, a man stood from where he'd been sitting. Maris stopped breathing. He carried himself with an air of authority mixed with the impetuousness of youth, the kind of man who didn't see why he shouldn't get his way. And he was beautiful. Not just physically, though God, he was certainly that, but with such an aura of charm that she couldn't imagine anyone denying him anything. Your Highness, she said, forgive me for keeping you waiting. He raised an eyebrow. There was a scar above it, a thin white line that somehow made him more striking. You mean since yesterday? He asked politely. Maris hid her nervousness. Had she met with him yesterday? Surely not for longer than a brief hello, she'd have remembered otherwise. Please let him be kind, she thought desperately as she offered a formal curtsy. He's older than Ramira, but if he's patient, if he's willing to wait for her to grow... I hope your accommodations have been satisfactory, she said, falling back on formal pleasantries. Very much so, Your Majesty. And the journey wasn't too taxing? Not at all. Silence fell. Maris reached for her tea, trying to ignore the way his eyes followed the movement. the way his gaze lingered on her hand as she lifted the cup, on her lips as she took a sip, on the curve of her throat as she swallowed. It wasn't the polite, distant attention of a man making conversation. It was the heated kind of look that made someone's pulse quicken. She set down her cup with trembling fingers and tried again. "Your Highness," she managed, her voice embarrassingly breathless, "we should discuss the alliance for Ramira." His eyes traveled down from her face to her neck, where her pulse was surely visible, hammering against her skin. Maris's words died in her throat. Heat flooded her face. His gaze fell to the neckline of her robes, where the silk draped over her curves. Worshipful, like he was savoring every detail, committing her to memory, caressing her with his gaze alone. "I'm sure my daughter would be pleased to meet you," she continued desperately. She's accomplished in music and languages, and I think you'd find her—" Something flickered in his expression. Frustration, maybe, or disappointment. "I told you," he interrupted, his voice dropping lower, rougher. "I'm not here for her." Maris blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not here for Ramira." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm here for you." Maris shook her head, confused. "Your Highness, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You came to discuss an alliance through marriage with my daughter." "No." He stood abruptly, began pacing. "God, you really don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" She stood too, feeling off balance. "The marketplace," he said, turning to face her. 16 years ago, you saved me. You stopped them from cutting off my hand for stealing bread. You gave me your earrings. You touched my face and smiled at me like I was worth something." Maris felt the room tilt. I don't... "I was 8 years old," he said, taking her hand. "Starving and certain I was going to die. And then you appeared like an angel and you saved me. And when I told you I was going to marry you when I grew up, you laughed. You said, 'Then I'll be waiting.'" Fragments flickered at the edges of her memory. A marketplace, a wedding parade, a small boy with dark eyes. But the details wouldn't come. "Your Highness," she said carefully, "I think you may be confused." "No." He moved closer. "I remember everything. How kind you were, how beautiful, how you were the only good thing in my entire miserable life." He was close enough now that she could smell him, leather and cardamom and something wild that made her wolf stir. "I've thought about you every single day for 16 years, he continued, his voice reverent. "You haunted my dreams. I joined the army to make something of myself. And when I finally had something to offer you, I came back." Maris shook her head. He sounded so earnest, and yet nothing about his story made sense. "Your Highness, this is—" She backed away, her heart hammering. "Join the army how? You're the prince of a foreign kingdom, one I've never been to. How would we have met? How were you ever starving?" "I love you," he interrupted. "I've loved you since I was 8 years old. I've loved you through every battle, every hardship. And now I'm here, begging you to give me a chance." Maris felt something crack wide open in her chest. Something she'd kept locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. The desperate, aching need to be seen and chosen and loved. "You're a prince," she whispered. "You're young and handsome and powerful. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone." He stepped closer. "I want you. I've only ever wanted you." "Stop," she breathed, but she didn't pull away. "Please stop saying these things." "Why?" His voice was rough, almost desperate. "Because you don't believe them? Or because you do?" She couldn't answer. Couldn't think past the warmth of his hand on her face, the heat in his eyes. "Let me kiss you," he whispered. "Just once, please, Maris." He'd used her name. Not Your Majesty or Your Highness, but her name. She'd spent 16 years being unwanted, 16 years being mocked and diminished. And here was this beautiful man looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. So instead of pulling away, instead of saying no, she surged up on her toes and kissed him. She felt his hand tangle in her carefully pinned hair, felt pins scatter to the floor as her hair tumbled down, felt his other hand at her waist, reverent, like he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch her. She was kissing a visiting prince, a man who'd come to discuss an alliance with her daughter, a man so young and beautiful. Either he was mocking her somehow, or he had to be confused. And if he were confused, was she taking advantage? "I can't," she gasped, pulling away. "I can't do this. I'm so sorry." "Don't—" He reached for her, but she backed away, shaking her head. "Please forget this happened." She turned and fled, gathering her skirts and running from the room like a girl instead of a queen. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. And she absolutely didn't acknowledge the part of her that wanted to turn around, go back, and kiss him again. Chapter 5. A few hours later, and Maris couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. She dressed for the ball in a daze, barely noticing her lady's nimble fingers pinning up her hair or fastening the sapphire necklace at her throat. Her mind was elsewhere, caught on the feel of his hands at her waist, the taste of him on her lips, the desperate way he had said her name. "Maris. Not Your Majesty, not Your Highness, just Maris." "Your Majesty, you look radiant this evening," one of her ladies murmured. She barely heard her. That voice was a faraway echo beneath the pounding of her pulse. She kept seeing his eyes, dark, steady, reverent. She kept feeling his breath against her skin. "Your Majesty?" "Oh, yes, thank you." When she entered the ballroom, the air was heavy with perfume and music. Maris took her seat at the high table and reached for her wine cup. She told herself it was for her nerves. Then she saw him. Prince Kalen stood across the hall, every inch the rogue she remembered. Dark hair slightly tousled, that thin scar above his brow glinting under lamplight. His formal tunic fit too well across those shoulders, and she suddenly remembered how solid they had felt beneath her hands. A young noblewoman brushed his arm as she laughed. His answering smile was slow, lazy, wicked. Maris's fingers tightened around her cup. She lifted it to her lips and drank. Her mind betrayed her almost instantly. What if those hands, the ones that had cradled her face so gently that morning, wandered lower? What if, instead of pulling away, she had let him continue? What if his mouth had traced the curve of her throat, lower, slower, until... She drank again. He was dancing now. The sight was unbearable. His hand rested on his partner's waist, and she pictured them against bare skin instead, the rough warmth of them exploring her body. She imagined his voice, low, husky, teasing, murmuring her name against her neck. Her pulse fluttered wildly. "More wine, Your Majesty?" "Yes, please," she said too quickly. Kalen moved with fluid grace, all strength and sin, and she couldn't stop watching. The lamplight gilded the edges of him like a secret she was never meant to see. She imagined those deft fingers undoing each pin from her hair, the heavy strands spilling over her shoulders. She imagined his mouth following their path. The thought made her dizzy. Her cheeks flushed, her skin prickled as if his breath were already there. She drank again. Her mind spun with questions she would never ask aloud. Would he be gentle or demanding? Would he whisper praises or rough, helpless sounds? Would he worship her the way his eyes had promised he would? She felt warmth coil low in her belly, spreading like fire. Her thighs pressed together beneath the tablecloth. He spun his partner, smiling faintly, and Maris imagined being the one in his arms, pressed close enough to feel the solid weight of him. To feel his breath against her ear as he told her all the scandalous things he'd dreamed of doing to his widowed queen. Her hand trembled with longing, the cup nearly slipped. "Your Majesty," said a voice. She startled, nearly spilling the rest of her drink. Lady Farida stood beside her, lips curved in a knowing smile. Perhaps your Majesty would like to retire for the evening. Already? Maris blinked. It's been 3 hours, Your Majesty. And forgive me, the lady added gently, but you have been rather focused on one particular guest. Another lady appeared, eyeing the empty carafe. A little rest might be wise, Your Majesty. Maris turned her head. Across the ballroom, Callan was no longer dancing. He was looking directly at her. His gaze pinned her where she sat, dark, hungry, unashamed. Her breath caught. Yes, she said faintly. Rest sounds good. The corridors blurred around her as her ladies guided her back to her rooms. The world felt hazy, soft at the edges, like a dream she didn't want to wake from. The music from the ballroom still echoed faintly, low strings, steady as a heartbeat. When the doors closed behind her, silence fell. She could still feel the wine pulsing through her veins. Her robe clung to her damp skin, silk whispering over curves she'd spent years pretending she didn't have. The air felt thick and hot. Her silk robe clung to her damp skin, sliding over curves she'd long pretended not to notice. She splashed cool water over her flushed cheeks, trying to slow her breathing. She had nearly convinced herself to lie down when she heard it. A soft thud from the balcony. Maris froze, droplets of water trailing down her neck. Then he was there. Callan stood framed in moonlight, his tunic unbuttoned at the throat, his hair mussed from the climb. He looked wild, dangerous, beautiful. Moonlight caught the gold in his eyes. The wolf in him was close to the surface. She could sense it in the charge of the air, in the way his gaze dragged over her, reverent and starving all at once. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Tell me to leave, he said, voice low, roughened by want. She didn't. The air thickened with him, pine and musk and something darker, something that made her wolf stir beneath her skin. His gaze flicked to the hollow of her throat, then lower, and she swore she could feel it, heat pooling there, a phantom touch. She felt the pull between them like gravity, like fate. After this morning, his voice broke slightly, you can't pretend you don't feel it. Maris swallowed. Feel what? She asked. Everything, he replied. Her robe hung loosely at her shoulders. One movement, and it would fall. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure he could hear it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the music still echoing in her head. Or maybe it was simply that she was tired of denying herself what she wanted. Her fingers found the silk tie. Show me, she whispered. Show me everything you've been thinking about. The robe slipped soundlessly to the floor. His sharp intake of breath was the most intoxicating sound she'd ever heard. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and then his hands were on her, hot, steady, reverent. He touched her like a man learning a sacred language, every brush of his fingers a whispered vow. When his mouth found her skin, the world fell away. He worshipped her, not hurriedly, but with aching patience, tracing every curve as though she were something rare, and every sigh he drew from her lips seemed to undo him a little more. When he finally claimed her, it wasn't simply passion. It was recognition, the meeting of 2 souls that had circled each other too long. Maris felt herself shatter and reform in his arms. Later, when the world had gone soft and quiet again, she fell asleep tangled in silk and moonlight, his arm heavy around her waist, perfectly content. She didn't know that by morning she wouldn't remember a thing. Chapter 6. The next day, Maris woke to warmth. Not the familiar coolness of silk sheets and empty space, but warmth, body heat. There was a man in her bed. Her eyes snapped open. She turned her head slowly, carefully, and found herself staring at a sleeping face inches from hers. Dark hair curling against the pillow, a scar above his left eyebrow. Features that were almost painfully handsome even in sleep. Who was this man? She'd never seen him before in her life. Maris's mind raced. The ball. She remembered the ball. Wine. Too much wine. Her ladies helping her back to her chambers, undressing her, and then... nothing. A blank space where her memory should be. Why had she been drinking so much anyway? This wasn't like her at all, and it wasn't like anything unusual had happened yesterday. She looked down. She was naked beneath the sheets. His arm was bare where it rested against her skin. Oh, gods. If anyone found out? If the servants came in and discovered a strange man in the queen's bed? She had to fix this. Carefully, Maris extracted herself from beneath his arm and slid out of bed to grab her silk robe from the floor. Maris? The man stirred. His hand reached across the empty space where she'd been. She forced her voice to stay calm. Quiet. You need to leave, sir, now. His eyes opened, dark brown with flecks of gold, and for a moment he just looked at her. Sleep soft and content, like waking up in her bed was exactly where he belonged. Then he seemed to register her expression. What's wrong? He sat up, the sheet pooling around his waist. Are you all right? Am I all right? Maris stared at him. Sir, I don't know who you are. He blinked, then smiled, actually smiled, like she'd made a joke. After last night, I can confidently say I've never known anyone more intimately, he said. The words hit her like a slap. Maris just looked at him, her face blank, her mind scrambling for any fragment of memory that would explain this. Anything at all. But she found nothing. And his smile faltered. Maris? He asked. Silence. Don't you remember? His voice was quieter now, uncertain. More silence. She couldn't speak. Couldn't process what he was saying because none of it made sense. Oh, gods! The color drained from his face. You really don't remember. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice thin. Had too much wine at the ball and I... But you kissed me, he interrupted, speaking faster now. Even before the ball in the way, on that morning we met, you kissed me. Maris shook her head slowly, confused and a little scared. Maris, don't you remember me at all? He stood abruptly, and she averted her eyes as he reached for his scattered clothes. I'm sorry, she whispered, and she was a little sorry for the man who seemed very sad now, but not sorry enough to dampen the need to get him out of her room. You should go, she managed, before the servants come, before this becomes a scandal. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw devastation in his eyes, and she didn't understand it. The hidden door, she said, gesturing to the wall panel with a shaking hand. It leads to the servants' corridors. He moved toward it like he was moving through water. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at her. I would never hurt you, he said quietly. I need you to know that, even if you don't remember anything else. Then he was gone. Maris touched the pillow where his head had been, looked at her scattered clothes, at her body, which ached in ways that whispered of pleasure and intimacy. But there was nothing in her mind, just emptiness where ours should be. She lifted her trembling hand to her lips. For just a heartbeat, she felt it, the ghost of a kiss. Then it vanished like smoke. Chapter 7. The following day, Maris moved in a fog, her body going through the familiar motions while her mind circled endlessly around something she couldn't quite grasp. She kept touching her lips absently during the council meeting, her fingers tracing the curve of her mouth like they were searching for something. Lord Hadim had to repeat a question about trade agreements twice before she heard him. Your Majesty? He asked gently. Are you quite well? Fine, she said quickly, dropping her hand. But tired didn't explain the restless energy humming beneath her skin, or the way her wolf paced anxiously, whining for something she couldn't name. Your Majesty. Her steward appeared at her elbow as she walked through the palace corridors that afternoon. Will you be dining with Prince Kalen this evening? Maris stopped walking. Prince who? She asked, frowning. The steward blinked, clearly taken aback. Prince Kalen, Your Majesty. He arrived 3 days ago to discuss an alliance. Maris had no recollection of any prince arriving. Her chest tightened with confusion, but she kept her expression calm. Of course, she said smoothly. Yes, I'll see him. Carefully, discreetly, she began asking questions. A prince had indeed arrived recently to discuss an alliance. There had been meetings, but when she tried to remember any of it, she found only emptiness. Later that afternoon, restless and seeking answers, Maris found herself wandering toward the palace library. She pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows between the shelves. That's when she saw him. A man sat with his back to her, shoulders slumped as he stared out the window at nothing. He turned when he heard her enter, and Maris forgot how to breathe. He was young, mid-20s at most, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. The man standing before her looked defeated, haunted. It was as if he'd gotten everything he'd wished for, and discovered it was worthless. Your Majesty, he said, rising and bowing formally. His voice was hollow. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that somehow made him more striking. But when he attempted to smile at her, it didn't reach his eyes. Your Highness, she said softly, confused by his obvious pain. Hope flared in his eyes for just an instant before dying completely when he saw her formal, polite expression. You don't remember me, do you? His voice was defeated. Maris blinked, confused. Your Highness, we've never met before, have we? He laughed, a sound so bitter it made her flinch. No, of course we haven't. Maris found herself drawn to him in a way that made no sense for a complete stranger. I'm told you came to discuss an alliance? She asked. Chapter 8. Maris couldn't stop thinking about him. The sad prince with the heartbroken eyes haunted her thoughts all afternoon. It wasn't just his story, the woman he loved who forgot him every day, the curse that seemed so impossibly cruel. It was the way he'd looked at her. This isn't fair to you. Why would it be unfair to her? She wasn't the woman he loved. But her mind refused to let it go, circling back again and again to the raw pain in his voice. As evening fell and the palace grew quiet, Maris found herself wandering the corridors aimlessly. She told herself she wasn't looking for him, that she just needed air. She was crossing through one of the outer hallways when she heard it, a low murmur of voices from the gardens beyond. One of them was his. Maris moved toward the sound without thinking. Below, in a secluded corner near the fountain, she saw two figures. Prince Kalen stood with his back to her, his posture tense. And before him stood a tall man in a dark cloak, lean and unnaturally still. So you're saying it's not permanent? Kalen was asking. I told you that before, didn't I? The tall man's voice was deep and gravelly, each word seeming to scrape against the air itself. It would have been more sinister if he didn't sound so profoundly bored. Maris moved closer, keeping to the shadows as she descended the garden steps. The closer she got, the more wrong the tall man seemed. Shadows moved around him in ways shadows shouldn't, curling, reaching, alive. The moonlight seemed reluctant to touch him, sliding away like oil on water. There was something tainted about him. When does it end? Callan asked, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. By the end of the month, your wish will have expired, the man in black said. Your great love will not remember you. What she forgot will forever be mine. But should you meet her again after that, then this time she will not forget you. Callan breathed out. Still, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. This was all for nothing then, wasn't it? What's the point of me becoming a prince to be able to court her if she doesn't remember being courted? Yes, the man in black said simply. That's what happens when you make deals with demons. Demons? The word made Maris still. This wasn't just some charlatan or trickster. This was something dangerous. What is happening here? She demanded, stepping out of the shadows. Both men spun toward her. Maris? Kalen's eyes went wide. What are you doing here? But Maris barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on the man in black, and as he turned to face her fully, she saw his eyes. They glowed green in the darkness. Your Highness, please step away from that man. Maris moved forward instinctively. There's something wrong with him. She could feel it now, wrongness radiating from him like cold from ice. Is that the queen, then? The creature asked, sounding utterly indifferent. Maris's heart pounded. What did you do? She asked, because she knew, somehow she knew, that this creature had done something terrible. I'll let your lover explain. He shifted to Kalan. Remember what I said. Oh, and don't contact me again. Maris turned her head for just an instant to catch Kalen's gaze, and when she looked back, the creature was gone. Simply gone, as if he'd never been there at all. For a moment, Maris couldn't move. Who was that? She asked, her voice shaking. A magician, Kalan said quietly. One who can grant wishes. Maris frowned, remembering what she'd overheard. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit together yet. And you made one? She asked. Yes. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. She searched his face, seeing guilt and shame written in every line. What was it? What did you wish for? She asked. Kalan drew a breath. To become a prince. Maris blinked. To become a prince? Not to have wealth, not to have power, to become a prince. But, the word came out confused, disbelieving, but you already are a... She stopped, looked at his face, saw the sheepish expression, the guilt, the truth written plainly in his eyes. You mean... Her mind was racing. That you weren't one before the wish? No, Kalan said simply. The word hung in the air between them. He wasn't a prince, had never been a prince. I grew up poor, Kalan said, his voice quiet. Starving in the streets. Then I became a soldier. A soldier, not nobility, not even a merchant or craftsman with some status. Maris nodded slowly, her heart aching for the boy he must have been. Well, she said carefully, I suppose I can understand the temptation to become a prince after all that. No! Kalan shook his head firmly, and there was something almost fierce in his expression. I was never ashamed of who I was, nor envious of richer men. I got by. That's what mattered. He paused, and Maris saw his jaw tighten. Until the woman I loved, he hesitated. The one who keeps forgetting you? Maris prompted softly. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. She was embarrassed by my station, me being a simple soldier. So for her, I wished to become a prince. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of meaning spreading outward. He'd made a deal with a demon magician, for a woman, because she was embarrassed by him. Something hot and angry flared in Maris's chest. What kind of shallow, cruel woman would reject someone like him, someone so obviously devoted, so clearly good, just because he wasn't born with a title? Perhaps, Maris said carefully, if she can't see your worth just as you are, she isn't the one for you. Kalan's lips curved into a sad smirk. You say that because you imagine a simple girl I might have met on the road during my travels. But my beloved could never be with someone who isn't nobility. Maris opened her mouth to protest, but he spoke before she could. She is a queen, he said, and his eyes found hers. The queen standing before me? The world stopped. Every sound, the fountain, the wind in the trees, her own heartbeat, seemed to fade into silence. Yes, it's you, Kaelin said, and his voice was gentle now, achingly tender. I've always loved you, and I would have become anything for you. He continued. Done anything. Maris couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The garden was spinning around her. When I met this magician, you see, he warned me of the consequences, Callan said. All wishes have a price, what you loved most. But I thought, there is nothing I love more than you. And by being a prince, I would have a chance to be with you. And so surely it was all worth it. Her mind was reeling. She was the woman under the curse. She was the one forgetting him. Which meant she'd met him before, kissed him before, had been with him before. And she didn't remember any of it. Callan smiled, but it was bitter and broken. What I loved most was the thought that you'd remember me. Like all these years I've remembered you. His voice cracked, and wishing for something made me lose any chance I had of that happening. Tears welled in Maris's eyes, hot and sudden. That cannot be, she said, her voice breaking. You're lying. He flinched like she'd struck him. I assure you I'm not. I don't believe for a second that I could be the one you love, she said desperately. Maris, I could never be ashamed of you, she interrupted, her voice rising with fierce conviction. Never. So you see, you have to be wrong. You have to be confused or mistaken or... But you were, Kaelin said quietly. When I came to find you, as a soldier, you were ashamed of us. Maris stilled. She wanted to deny it. More than anything, she wanted to tell him he was wrong. But she couldn't. Because she realized right there, even though she didn't remember, she knew, with horrible, crushing certainty, that it was true. She would have been ashamed, but not of him, never of him. Of herself. Because I don't believe someone like you could ever love someone like me, she whispered, meeting his gaze. Callan stepped closer, concern flooding his features. What? His voice was urgent now, almost desperate. Someone like you? What are you talking about? And suddenly the dam broke. For 16 years, Maris cried, and the tears spilled over now, hot tracks down her cheeks. I've lived with a man who belittled me, amongst people he encouraged to humiliate me. You are young and beautiful and brave and perfect, she said, and her voice was raw with every wound she'd been pretending didn't hurt. It seems impossible that you might... She couldn't say it, couldn't even speak the words love me because they felt like tempting fate. Callan took her hands, both of her hands, holding them between his like they were precious, like they were treasure. Then let me prove it to you, he said. And there was fire in his voice now, determination replacing the defeated emptiness she'd seen before. His eyes blazed with sudden purpose, and Maris felt something flutter weakly in her chest. How? She asked helplessly. How could I ask you to do that if I keep forgetting you? Every morning she woke up with no memory of him. Every day he had to start over. After a month, I will stop being a prince, Kaelin said, the words tumbling out rapidly now, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he didn't speak fast enough. Maris blinked, trying to follow. I didn't want to be one forever, he explained. Just long enough that you'd give me a chance, but... Well, then I'd hoped you would love me for me. He looked almost shy suddenly, vulnerable in a way that made her heart twist. Maris reached up with trembling hands and cupped his face. His skin was warm beneath her palms. Real. I do, she whispered, and meant it with everything she had. I will. She didn't understand how she could be so certain of something her mind couldn't remember, but her body knew. Her heart knew. His smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, brilliant and beautiful and full of hope. "Then let us part," he said. "I will find you in a month, and then I will never let you go again. For as long as it takes to convince you, you will know the depth of my love for you." Maris believed him. "1 month," she said, and it felt like a vow. "1 month," he echoed, and it sounded like a promise. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of everything he couldn't say. Epilogue. The flying carpet soared above the palace, and Kaelin couldn't stop laughing. "I can't believe you had a flying carpet this entire time," he gasped, clutching Maris's waist as the wind whipped through his hair. "And I only found out about it now." "It's a family secret," she said, grinning as she guided the carpet higher with practiced ease. "The boys call it Zephyr." The setting sun caught the gold band on her finger, ornate, beautiful, exactly what he'd insisted on giving her. "Well, good thing we're married then," her husband laughed. Married, she thought, to this man who'd spent a year proving his love to her, who'd courted her as a soldier with nothing but devotion to offer, who'd made her believe, finally, impossibly, that she was worth wanting. The carpet dipped playfully and he yelped, grabbing her tighter. "I've got you," Maris snickered, "always." Below them, the palace gardens spread out in geometric perfection. She could see guests still milling about from the wedding, Rhaenyra waving enthusiastically, the twins probably planning some mischief with the leftover cake. "You remember everything now," Kaelin said softly, his arms wrapped around her from behind as she steered. "Every moment. Every time I came back for you." "I do." She leaned back against his chest. "And I'm never forgetting again." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Promise?" "I swear it." She turned her head to meet his eyes, those dark eyes that had held devotion from the very first moment. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll remember." "That I love you?" he asked. "That we love each other," she corrected. Kaelin kissed her as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson, as the carpet carried them higher into the evening air, as the call to prayer echoed from distant minarets. He'd spent 16 years remembering a promise. She'd spent 1 year learning to believe in it. And they planned to spend the rest of their lives proving it true. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. This week, I've also written a new exclusive story with something a little different. It's got dragons. Yes, dragons.